joining this morning. I really do appreciate it. I know it's early in the morning to do anything, never mind attend a talk or speak at something. So it's very much appreciated. And if you haven't been before, Five Things is a morning meetup where three speakers share 5 key takeaways from one of their favorite non-fiction books. I hope you leave this hour either a bit smarter, hopefully, inspired to pick up one of the books that we talk about today, or just feeling a spot happier about stuff in general. A few bits of housekeeping: the event is being recorded, though you won't appear unless you contribute, and if you could please stay muted whilst the speakers are on, that'd be much appreciated. So, yeah, we'll hopefully have around 20 minutes at the end. Sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't, to ask the speakers some questions. So if any questions arise while the speakers are on, then just pop them in the chat and hopefully we'll get to them at the end. So last time on Five Things, Andrew gave us sage medical advice that for a long life, one should smoke before you're 55 and take psychedelics after you're 55. Pretty sure that was my key takeaway from that. I'm sure he had much more useful advice. I'm sure Andrew will correct me if that's not right. Philip advised us to stay curious and claimed that there's no age limit to creativity, which, being an old bloke, I totally agree with. And Rita had a hard look at our progressive beliefs through white tears, brown scars, made it clear that the responsibility for change still lies with the marginalised, which obviously isn't great. Every Five Things is recorded, so you can catch up anytime via YouTube, and I'll pop the link in the chat later. So this is the 19th Five Things, and by the end of this event, we'll have explored 57 books, which equates to 285 things. I remember every single one of them, obviously. We've had some truly wonderful speakers, and as always, I'm delighted to add 3 new speakers to this highly esteemed bunch. So we will say hey to Max, Patricia, and Rebecca. Hey, Max, Patricia, and Rebecca. Okay, well. My headphones turned themselves off for some reason.
Faster.
Yeah. Yeah. So our first speaker is Max. Max is our self-confessed tutor. He said he's sure he's mentioned to mention it within 5 minutes of meeting you. Is that correct? 5 minutes. And he's come from the bright lights, come to the bright lights of Edinburgh to make his fortune. Fortune is still a work in progress, but in the meantime, he runs events for Codebase Edinburgh and obsesses over the correct pH values of fish tank water, very specific, and adds to his admirably vast collection of autumnal turtlenecks, which don't seem to be sporting one today, Max. But
I genuinely consider it.
I'm a massive workshop geek, so I'm super interested to listen to Max's 5 Things on the Workshop Survival Guide by Rob Fitzpatrick and Devin Hunt. Max.
Thank you very much, Maestro. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming along. And yes, I'm going to talk today about the Workshop Survival Guide. There is actually quite a substantial subtitle, which I will now say, but please don't feel obligated to remember it. It's the Workshop Survival Guide: How to Design and Teach Educational Workshops That Work Every Time by Rob Fitzpatrick and Devin Hunt. We'll just call it the Workshop Survival Guide, but the subtitle adds a little bit of flavor, I hope. Before I think I go too much into the book itself, I might go a little bit self-indulgently, if that's okay, about why I want to talk about this book today and what this book has sort of meant to me, my story with the book. But first, Andy, if we could jump to the next slide, I would be very much in your debt. So kind of go over the summary and my sort of background to this book. So I've run quite a few workshops before. I used to work in the whiskey industry, so they were pretty easy to sort of be successful with, because people like to drink whiskey, and if they're at a whiskey workshop, you don't have to work hard to win people over. And I've done some educational stuff when I was working for Expedia, but it's been a really, really long time, to be honest, since I've actually facilitated a workshop and planned that whole workshop. And I've found myself in a position where I have a workshop coming up in a couple of weeks' time, and I've spent so much time thinking about it, obsessing about it, to be totally honest, and it's really become quite lionized in my head. And I think it's because we've all been to workshops, and we've all been to workshops that aren't great, and that's all I can kind of think about, all the things that might go wrong, all the things that I can't prepare for, all the things that I can't be ready for. So I thought, I know a lot of people, I mean, that's one thing I'm very lucky in my work, that I know a lot of people who are absolute legendary workshop runners. I mean, Andy's done workshops for us. Lots of people have done great workshops. So decided to reach out to a couple of people. And a colleague recommended me this book, saying it was just a wonderful resource to give you some confidence, particularly in the planning stage, but also just the entire kind of workshop process. So I picked it up, and I am happy to report that I have found it incredibly useful, and it's really increased my confidence. And really, this is what the book is trying to achieve. It's planning and delivering workshops with a more consistent level of quality every single time. So it's that confidence that if you have that plan in place and you have that design in place, you're actually going to be in a really, really good position way before you ever start the actual workshop. So that's a kind of overall backstory. Let's get into the eponymous 5 things. If I could have the next slide, my friend. Thank you. So energy and goodwill are resources. This kind of feels quite self-evident when you reflect on it, but I've never really seen it written out in the way that it's expressed in this book. And I found that really, really interesting and quite useful. So the idea is a great workshop is really just maintaining high levels of energy and engagement. It's a kind of a composite of both enthusiasm and attentiveness, and goodwill, which is really just a way of expressing the trust that the attendees of your workshop have for you as a facilitator. And keeping those in balance and keeping those high, that's what's going to make it successful. So I'll kind of break down each in turn. Goodwill is kind of, I'm going to go the wrong way around because I'm a maverick. You can't stop me, it's my 10 minutes. Goodwill is actually one that you shouldn't worry too much about, and I found that a real learning. Goodwill is generally going to start off pretty high, because more often than not, apart from in very specific scenarios, people are wanting the workshop to be good. Very few people will attend your workshop being like, oh, I hope this is rubbish, There are people out there, but the vast majority of people will be kind of hoping that it will go well for you. So that I find that quite encouraging, and it's a good starting point. Don't go into a room assuming that everyone's going to be like, I hate this person and I want them to fail. Most people want you to succeed, and that's something to keep in mind. You're going to sort of gain more goodwill and grow that goodwill by providing value, and that's, again, feels quite self-evident, but I feel for myself, for instance, I would lean towards trying to provide entertainment. And it's bringing it back and saying, what is the point of this workshop? It's not to entertain, it's to educate. And so that's a really interesting sort of takeaway. In terms of energy, this is a really, really precious resource. Even if you have an incredible set of ideas and learnings to take away from the workshop, if people are knackered, they're going to tune out. If people are tired, they're going to tune out. And so the book recommends that you really, really design your workshop around preserving people's energy, and it gives you some great tips on how to do that. For one thing, it honestly says the most important planning is at the start is make sure you book in your coffee breaks and your lunch breaks first. You should design the whole workshop around what slots you have for coffee breaks and lunch breaks if it's longer than about 90 minutes, because that is really, really important time for people to digest what they're learning and absorb what they're learning, and also just kind of, get a little bit of energy back. And it sort of really warns you against the temptation to eat into your coffee breaks if you're going over. It says QA, that's for sacrificing, but keep your coffee breaks. It calls them sacred, which I love. Coffee breaks are sacred. It's a wonderful statement. It also talks a lot about leaning on different teaching methods in order to preserve energy. Don't just use one method for the entirety of your workshop, and move between different kind of areas of teaching, different styles of teaching, to preserve that energy and keep people engaged and excited and switched on. And one thing that I really, really loved is protect your own energy. The book advises that during a lunch break or a coffee break, you physically go and hide, like in a cupboard. Well, maybe not literally a cupboard, but make sure that you have an area where you can escape and rest, because your energy is important too. And if you're flagging, that is going to bring down the whole facilitation of the workshop. But if you're running a workshop, people want to ask you questions, even on your lunch break. So during your lunch break, go find a corner, but ahead of time, set up a little corner where you can hide. And I just loved having the permission to go and hide, because that is my instinct as well. So it was really, really lovely to see. So that was a bit of a cheeky 5 thing, because I had a lot of things in that. So we'll move on to the next one, which I promise is a little less bloated, and that is outcomes. So outcomes are the most important thing. And again, for me, I think this is something which you kind of know instinctually, but having it written out is so helpful, because my sort of my being, I would want to sort of entertain people first and foremost. And honestly, I'd be like, I want people to like me. But really, the most important thing about designing your workshop is that you are providing great outcomes, that people are going to have high value takeaways that they will leave your workshop with. And by takeaway, I mean new pieces of knowledge. So this 5 things, I think, is an example of actually doing it quite well. You lay out 5 points that you want people to walk away with. And then you build your entire presentation, all the supplementary information is around those 5 main points. And that's really the same core structure that you should apply to your workshop. Have your main learning outcomes, and then draw out from those all the kind of ephemera and flavor, but it has to be about those 4 or 5 or however many you have, those core outcomes. And never lose sight of these. Once you have the breaks in, which do come first, the book recommends bringing in all these outcomes as your next kind of most important thing, and structuring the workshop around how you deliver these outcomes. They are really the kind of the core aspect of the overall project. And if I could have the next slide, please, Maestro. Know who's in the room. And I've just, again, proving my maverick soul, I've got the wrong font in this slide, so I do apologize, Andy. I don't know how I did that, but hopefully adds a bit of spice and excitement for everyone watching today. This is a really interesting one for me, and actually this challenged a lot of my preconceptions, so I really, really wanted to kind of focus on it. It doesn't matter how great, you can have the best workshop ever. You can be the greatest facilitator, you can be charismatic and clever and wise. If you haven't tailored that workshop for the audience who's attending, it's not going to succeed. So if we're thinking about, like outcomes, like we were mentioning before, there's no outcome that's going to be useful for literally everyone. The book itself actually has a phrase it uses for outcomes, which I love how casual it is. It calls them aha moments, where someone's like, oh yeah, and those are really, really great to generate, but you're not going to be able to generate an aha moment if someone is more experienced or already knows those things or has a different kind of perspective on those. So it's now impossible to find one that's relevant to everyone. So for instance, if I was running like a startup founder course, which would, given my work at Codebase is the kind I would be doing, if it's for early founders, I wouldn't be able to use that same workshop for people who were running companies that have been going for years, or who already had, dedicated HR or a partner or CTO, things like that. So it's really, really important to tailor your workshop to the specific people who are going to be attending. And as such, it recommends doing as much research as is reasonably possible ahead of time, depending on who's going to be in the workshop. You should try and establish who they are, why they would want to come to your workshop, what their experience level is going to be, and any kind of concerns that they might have, and kind of tailor it as much as possible. One thing that I found really, really powerful is advertise accurately to your audience. It's so easy to be like, literally everyone can come along. And that is my instinct. It's like, you never want to make people feel excluded. Bums on seats are the ultimate goal of any workshop. But really, if you're building your workshop around learning outcomes, you have to accept that some of these learning outcomes aren't going to be as useful to other people. So just make sure that when you advertise your workshop and when you're building your workshop, to express to people the kind of learning outcomes that you intend, because that way folk will be able to decide themselves if it's going to be useful, and they're going to be much, much better at knowing what they than you are ahead of time. So even though it's kind of counterintuitive to what my gut feeling would be, it's really, really important. And I found that a really valuable learning from this book. Next slide, please, Andy. Don't go flavor crazy. I was really deeply tempted to put a Guy Fieri picture in here, but I didn't have pictures for any of the other slides. And I just thought, I can't just have one with Guy Fieri. Was that a bad shout, folk? Ask me in the questions at the end. I think maybe I should have put Guy Fieri in here. Maybe next time. But this is one that's very, very relevant to me. As I kind of alluded to before, a big approach for when I try like interact and like workshops and things is I want to have a laugh. I want to be fun. I'm like the math teacher who has a piano tie, comes like start swaggering in. Oh, I'm jazz hands. But don't make that the focus of your workshop. Yeah, again, I know it's kind of reiterating another of the 5 things, but all things are linked. It's really, really vital that the learning outcomes come first. So when I'm talking about flavor, I'm talking about all the like fun bits. Those have to be the very last thing. And they use a great analogy in the book, which is then they sort of compare it to cooking, which I think cooking is a better analogy because any scenario can be related back to cooking. But it's like spices, your little spices at the end. You can add a bit of spice. It's going to be great. It's going to really elevate the dish. But if you go crazy with spice, it's just going to become an amorphous blob. You're going to, lose the main sort of threads of flavor that the actual food has. So don't go spice wild. Your job isn't to entertain in a workshop. Try and be entertaining if you can, but realize that that's supplemental. Your job is to educate, and that has to be the most important kind of part of what that workshop is about. Unless I suppose you're doing a workshop on entertaining. But again, these are sort of edge cases. And one advice that it gives, for instance, is with your slides. You should be able to make your slide deck in about an hour for about any workshop. Just the absolute core. Forget about all the bells and whistles and the fun aspects. Sort of dial down on the core, and you'll find you'll have a lot more success. Your energy alone can't carry a workshop. You're a facilitator, not a host. And I know that might feel semantic, but I find sort of focusing on that is actually really helpful. By facilitating a workshop, you are doing something communally. You're not, it's not your show. You're here to bring a group of people together. You are there to facilitate their learning, but come to those conclusions themselves. So don't double down on just trying to, come in singing, dancing. Focus on the content and you will succeed. And Andy, I have no idea if my timing has been on or miles off, but let's go to the final slide for our grand finale, our 5th thing. So a great workshop succeeds in advance. I find this really encouraging, honestly. And I hope, everyone here who might want a workshop one day will find this encouraging too. If your workshop is well designed, it's going to work the vast majority of the time. You can't prepare for all things. You just can't. That's just life. But if you've spent the time to dial in on your outcomes, you go in knowing what your outcomes are, you're going to succeed 9 times out of 10. If you are careful with the goodwill and balance and energy, that's going to help a lot as well. But once you kind of have a good design in place, the facilitation should be easy and actually might even be nice. It might even be fun because you can actually come in and just focus on the day itself. If you do your work in advance for the workshop, if you have your good plan, if you have your good skeleton, you're going to be absolutely laughing all the way to the proverbial bank. And on the note of the proverbial bank, I think I've sort of toddled through my 5 things. Here they are again. I don't know how much time we have, but I'll just read them all out one more time. Energy and goodwill, they're precious resources. Keep them in balance. Don't forget one or the other, and that will help you a lot. It's all about outcomes. When you're building your workshop, think about what you actually want to teach people. What are people going to walk away from the workshop and be like, oh, I went to a great workshop today. Here's what I learned. Know who's in the room. You can't be everything for all people. It's just not possible. So find out who's in the room and make sure that you tailor your workshop as much as possible to your audience. Don't go flavor crazy. It's not Flavor Town. It's Flavor Hamlet. A little bit of spice goes a long way for sure, but don't upend all the cumin in because otherwise you're gonna get a sore tummy. And a great workshop succeeds in advance. Preparation is key. If you take the time to make your plan, and it doesn't have to be years of work, but if you sat down, you've made your skeleton, everything in place, you're going to find that you're going to get great success long before you ever move into the room or the Zoom area that you're doing your workshop. Everyone, thank you so much for listening to my 5 things. I hope you learned something, had a couple aha moments, maybe. If you did, pop it in the chat. And I will pass you back on into the callous, the gentle hands of Andy Irvine.